Good morning, everybody. Madam Administrator, are we all set? So this is a briefing on the stipulated agreement that is before us today for a potential action later on this afternoon. DMHAS and the AG's office are here to walk us through the agreement, and then we can ask questions. So the plan today is to have this briefing, go into caucus where we can eat during caucus, and then come back if all parties are ready to vote on the agreement and the bills that are before us today. So that's where we are. And if you guys want to come up, don't be shy, you can all come up. And if you wouldn't mind as you go to speak, because normally we don't have stipulated agreements on the appropriation side. The reason this is before us is because there's money in the budget for it. If you're all interested in looking at the DMHAS section of our budget, there's $3.5 million that was set, that was put in the budget to start to comply with this stipulated agreement. Next year, it will be more expensive, and the year after that, it will be more expensive relative to the cost of this agreement. If we did not approve this agreement, it may still go forward, and if it doesn't, it would go to court, which may lead to increased expenditures. But from the appropriation side, that's what we care about mostly, is the cost of it, and we'll let them talk now and go through things. Floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, co-chairs, Senator Austin and Representative Walker, vice chairs, ranking members, and other members of the committee. My name is Rosemary McGovern. I'm Associate Attorney General for Civil Litigation. With me today are Assistant Attorney General Sean Rudchick to my left, and representatives from Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the DMHAS Medical Director, Vinith Carvalho, and to my far left is the Director of DMHAS Forensic Services, Jessica Wagner. Thank you for having us here today to speak in support of a contingent settlement agreement that the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Psychiatric Security Review Board, and Whiting Forensic Hospital have entered into with the plaintiffs to resolve the federal lawsuit Lindsay versus Navarrete. We ask the committee to vote yes, approving this contingent settlement agreement. Just briefly, pursuant to state statute, the settlement agreement requires General Assembly approval because the state will need to spend more than $2.5 million in order to comply with the terms of the settlement agreement. To be clear, though, the state will not be paying the money to the plaintiffs in this case. Instead, money will be used to expand the number of community providers that can provide services to the qualified equity class members that are part of the settlement agreement. The contingent agreement has been fully negotiated. It is contingent on General Assembly approval and then the court's approval. At this time, the terms of the agreement cannot be changed. The committee has within its discretion only to vote yes or no to approve the agreement. And as I've stated, we are here today seeking and asking for you to approve the settlement agreement. Just briefly, as to the history of this case, this matter has been pending in federal court since 2022. At that time, I was lead counsel for DMHAS and for Whiting Forensic Hospital. Counsel with me, Attorney Rudchek, has been with the case since its inception. In 2024, when I became part of the Attorney General Administration, Attorney Rudchek became lead counsel, and he's the attorney who negotiated this settlement agreement over the course of over a year. As the attorneys for the state, Attorney Rudchek and I, and others from my office, we were successful in limiting the scope of this complex litigation. Nonetheless, the issues that remain pending are complicated, complex, and challenging. Now, the state agencies and the Attorney General's office believe that this contingent settlement agreement provides the state with the best resolution of this case. It avoids many months of future litigation, and it avoids the risk of an adverse ruling and judgment that the state could be required to spend significantly more money than what is required in this agreement. And it also avoids a judgment that could limit the state's discretion in how it handles this population. Okay, what is this case about? This case is a class action lawsuit. It is brought by two named plaintiffs who represent a class of persons who are similarly situated to them. The class is a subset of acquittees at Whiting Forensic Hospital who complain that their rights under the Americans with Disability Act are being violated because it is taking too long for them to move from hospital setting to the community to receive treatment services, and significantly after their treatment team and clinicians have determined that they are clinically ready and safe to receive treatment in the community. I will come back in a moment to explain some of these terms that I've just used. I'll come back to this point, but first I'm going to unpack some of the terms that I've used in the description of the class and their claims. First, so plaintiffs are acquittees. So what this means, these patients they're a subset of the patients that are at Whiting. There are civil commitment patients and there are acquittees. These individuals are acquittees, which means that they have been found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect of committing a crime. They have been determined not guilty after they have proven that their mental illness made them incapable of appreciating that at the time of their conduct that their acts were wrong or that they could not control their conduct. They presented this and demonstrated that they were entitled to this defense before a three-judge panel. Once the three-judge panel makes this determination, these individuals are committed to the Psychiatric Security Review Board. The board oversees the treatment of the acquittees. I'll use that term interchangeably, acquittees and patients, but to be clear, these individuals are just the persons who have gone through the criminal justice system and have been determined not guilty of committing crimes. The other patients, they are civilly committed individuals. Their commitment is overseen by the probate court, and it is a separate process. The similarity between these patients, whether they're acquittees or civil committees, is that they receive the same treatment at Whiting, no matter what their status. So the significant difference is that with the civil commitment patients, once the clinicians determine that the individuals are ready to be discharged to the community because they're clinically stable and safe, they are then simply transitioned into the community. There is no oversight which the Psychiatric Security Review Board provides. So even though the clinicians at Whiting may determine that the acquittee is clinically appropriate and safe to begin to transition into the community, that issue has to be presented to the Psychiatric Security Review Board, and that's done through a process that's called a temporary leave application. Let me just pause for a moment. Okay, and again, because the acquittees are not convicted of criminal acts, their commitment to the PSRB and placement at Whiting is not punishment. They are patients and not inmates at Whiting Forensic Hospital. And again, the PSRB is responsible for monitoring the acquittees' confinement, and they decide when they receive treatment in the community. The board is comprised of experts in the area of criminal justice and psychology. They are former prosecutors, former public defenders, former judges, psychologists, psychiatrists, and there's also public members that are on the board. As far as Whiting Forensic Hospital, so when an equity is first determined not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, they're committed to the board, but they are confined at Whiting Forensic Hospital. We've provided you, I hope you've received it in advance, a printout of it's a chart of sorts that shows the progression of the equities from Whiting maximum security to the point where they are, they apply for temporary leave. The hospital applies for temporary leave from the Psychiatric Security Review Board. If you look at that, it'll help kind of facilitate my explanation of the patient's progression from the maximum security setting to temporary leave. So when the equity is first committed to the board, they're placed at the maximum security building, which is called Whiting, just to make it extra confusing. So there's Whiting Hospital is divided into the Whiting building, which is maximum security, and Dutcher, which is the enhanced security building. At Whiting, the equities are provided, care that will stabilize them. Typically, when they come to the maximum security setting, they are at a clinically critical stage, and they require long-term care, medication, counseling. They have to develop trust and rapport with the clinicians. They typically remain at Whiting for a number of months, if not years, before they are clinically stable enough to go to the enhanced security building, Dutcher, where they continue their treatment. It's still a locked facility, but they continue their treatment and they begin to earn privilege levels that range from level 1 to level 4. It's a slow process where they begin to experience more independence in the hospital unit and then within the hospital building and then eventually onto the hospital grounds. It's very closely monitored by the clinicians and the hospital administration. The civil commitment patients and the equities, they progress through this process in the exact same manner. And during this time, the hospital provides, I believe it's 6 months reports to the Psychiatric Security Review Board about the status of each of the equities and how they're progressing through the privilege system and then in their treatment in general. Then we get down to the point where the individuals who've reached level 4 have the ability to receive hourly passes so that they can be on the grounds of the hospital. Once someone has had that privilege and has safely demonstrated that they're responsibly handling and safely handling that privilege, that is when the treatment team in the hospital determines that this is an individual who is ready to begin the process of exploring treatment in the community. These are the individual class members that we are talking about with regard to this settlement. So it's a very small subset of the entire group of equities who are at issue in the settlement agreement. The DMHAS folks and Sean will be able to, Attorney Rudchick will be able to describe in more detail how that process works in the settlement agreement. But one thing to make clear, the settlement agreement does not in any way change the existing statutes or requirements as it relates to the equities and having them transition into the community. The process remains the same as it has been since the PSRB first came into existence over 30 years ago. Another point is the agreement does not in any way require equities to immediately be released from the hospital. Certainly it doesn't apply to all equities, but even the subset, those equities who've reached the privilege level 4 at Dutcher, for them as well, this is not a mandate requiring them to be released immediately into the community for treatment. Instead, they'll still have to go through the same process as all other equities have had to, following the PSRB guidelines, statutes, and requirements. Also, this settlement agreement does not interfere with the clinician's professional judgment with regard to the stability of the patients and as to whether they are safe to be transitioned into the community. Their judgment remains independent, but they still are required to have the temporary leave applications presented to the PSRB and satisfy the PSRB that the individual equity is in fact safe to transition into the community and receive treatment in the community. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is that about the temporary leave process itself. Once the PSRB grants an equity temporary leave, that is a very slow process of transitioning the individual into the community. It starts by the individual, it's broken up into 2 phases. One phase is, allowing day treatment, and the second phase allowing overnight treatment. And it starts gradually, 1 day a week. The individual goes into the community and during that for treatment, and then during that time they're monitored by the community provider, and there's contact with the hospital throughout that time. Then it becomes 2 days a week, 3 days a week, so on, up until we get to about 7 days a week. And then the second phase will start where the individual will start receiving overnight treatment in the community. And again, that's also gradual, starting from 1 day up until the point where there are 7 days a week. Again, constant contact with the hospital, and the hospital has the ability at any time that there's a concern about the equity's condition or their safety risk, the hospital has the ability to require the patient to be brought back to the hospital and remain there for treatment. Once an individual has been on temporary leave with overnights for a sustained period of time and that they've been successful in managing that, that's when the treatment team considers the next phase of applying for conditional release to the PSRB. And at that point, I'm going to pause and allow for you to ask it whatever questions you would like. And then also you'll be able to hear from the other members who are up here who know far more about the settlement agreement than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the other people want to give a preface before we start asking questions, so that we can have you answer some of the questions that people may have before we get to that point? So if you want to just give us an overview of the agreement and where we stand.
Yes, so my name is Vinath Carvalho, Medical Director for Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I would like to preface this all by saying that the patients in the plaintiff class, or who will be in the plaintiff class that we're discussing today, are some very high-risk patients. And Attorney McGovern spoke about them coming into our system after they've been found not guilty by reason of insanity, that it's usually they've committed a very serious offense when they're in a mentally deteriorating state. And so when they come into our system, we make sure that they're placed in the maximum security area. And that's the Whiting building, as Attorney McGovern said. Now, we take an enormous amount of resources to stabilize these patients. It generally takes years for them to be in the Whiting building before they can move into the enhanced security. And while they're there, we're talking about resources related to intensive psychotherapy, medication therapy. Sometimes they will not take their medications, and so we will have to petition the probate court to get involuntary medications from them and so forth. Throughout this process, there is constant evaluation of these patients, of their clinical statuses, of their risk statuses. And when they have adequately stabilized, and it's only when their risk factors are sufficiently mitigated that we move them into the enhanced security building. And as Attorney McGovern said, the building is still closed. It's still a locked facility. What it does is it enables these patients to participate in the privilege system that exists. And even while they're in this enhanced facility, we have done a tremendous amount of work to continue to stabilize them, to make sure that they're taking their medications, make sure that we're assessing their risk, adjusting their medications as we go forward to make sure that they're sufficiently stabilized. And we also in the hospital have oversight. So we have a clinical oversight, a clinical committee called the Dutcher Review Committee that provides clinical oversight periodically of these patients. We also have a forensic risk committee that also provides oversight on the risk issues. And this forensic committee consists of a clinical leadership of the hospital at the highest level, and also of a consulting forensic psychiatrist who comes in to provide additional layer of risk. So by the time these patients are ready to move into the community, they have been assessed multiple times, numerous times, and we make sure that their risks are sufficiently mitigated. The issue that we have is that it's very difficult to place them. It's difficult to place them because of their risk, but also because they generally need a mental health intensive residential program. This is the program that they will go into the community. It's a program with a high level of supervision. It's the highest level of supervision you can have in the community. And it has 24/7 supervision, and it also has a very high staff to patient ratio. We are talking about 1 staff to 3 patients or 1 staff to 4 patients. And so even as they enter into the community and they are communicating and contacting people in the community per se, there's a level of oversight and supervision from the staff in these residential facilities that help them. And so they stay in these facilities for long periods of time. So the issue becomes, there are only a finite amount of beds. And so when these beds are filled, which they usually are, there is nowhere else to put them. And then you now have a logjam in the hospital of patients waiting to get out and have nowhere to go. So the only time beds become available in the system, we only have 238 beds across the state. The only time beds become available is when somebody dies, unfortunately, or somebody gets sick, have mental deterioration and has to go back into the hospital, or somebody moves into a nursing home. So take, for example, last year. Last year, we had 6 to 7 patients waiting to get into these mental health intensive residential programs. And these 6 to 7 was not just only the patients under the Psychiatric Security Review Board, but patients also from other state hospitals. Only 36 beds became available. And so, as you can imagine, you have this logjam in the system. So you also have patients waiting to get into the hospital to be treated. And so it really creates a problem for us. So it's really imperative that we provide more programs to increase the bed capacity across the state to accommodate these patients coming into our system. So I'll stop there for now and hand it back over to you.
Either one of you two want to say something too, please? You got to take that mic down, say your name, and turn it on. There you go.
Yes, good morning, Senators, Representatives. Sean L. Rutchick, Assistant Attorney General, and I was involved in negotiation of this. As you've heard from Dr. Carvalho, and you might have intimated, the clinical folks at DMHAS were integral in coming up with this agreement. You can say that it's their agreement. The forensic professionals, the psychiatrist, psychologist, medical director's office, everybody was involved in this. And I want to focus on what it doesn't do. It doesn't change the process to rush people along. It doesn't try to get them to full level 4 before they're ready. You heard the term treatment team or phrase treatment team. There's no interference with that. The treatment team makes a determination that this individual is ready to progress and explore that. What it does is once they've reached that full level 4, There are timely reviews by existing committees. These things are being done already. But just want to make sure people don't fall through the cracks. They're not being reviewed by, for example, the Forensic Review Committee when they should be periodically and things of that nature. In addition, it makes sure that the agency isn't, keeping somebody just because they lack the resources to do it. In other words, their treatment team, everybody, including the forensic specialists, et cetera, have determined this person should be receiving, doesn't require that hospital level of care, could start receiving services in the community and is ready to do so, but the only issue is financial. This addresses that. That being said, there's nothing in the agreement that you're going to find that has a dollar amount on it. Again,
So,
that's because
just so you know, people are having a hard time hearing you just because the mic is too far away and we have bad audio here. I apologize, but a couple people texted me, so.
sorry about that. Do you want me to go back? All right.
No, that's all right. You don't need to.
Turn the other one on too. So, I guess we can only have one. Oh, okay, I'll try that.
All right. I'll pick up where I left off now that I've forgotten. With respect to the funding, this is Appropriations Committee. You can scour this agreement. You're not going to find a dollar figure in it. Again, back to the theme, this is DMHAS and the treatment professionals. They've taken a look at it and said, look, as far as we can project based on the cohort of people we think are going to arrive at this level and need services in a reasonable future, they've taken a look at it, and that's what they've put on in terms of a budgetary amount to keep this going. And that's kind of the beauty, if you will, of the settlement. It gives the agency the discretion to do that. One thing we haven't mentioned so far that I think is crucial, this is a 7-year agreement. So unlike a consent order of the court, which can go on, and our grandkids will be dealing with it, this is a finite agreement. Not to say that at the end of it it'll totally fall apart, but we have a lot of control at the agency level to determine what resources it needs, how to appropriately allocate for those, and to do what it needs to do. Nothing in the agreement and any of the pages interferes with those clinical determinations. When I say clinical, I want to make it clear it's not just one psychiatrist or a licensed clinical social worker. It's a team that also includes forensic specialists because, as you heard, this is a specific population and they have different risks. So these folks are looked at very high level multiple times, and by the time they start to transition, they've seen, the treatment professionals, including forensics, have taken a look at these folks many times. It's not interfering with that process at all, and it's not trying to hustle them out the door. This just reflects what needs to be done to comply with the ADA, and the specific provision of the ADA is treatment in the least restrictive setting available. The treatment team has determined that that's appropriate. It's just that there's a bottleneck. Some people fall through the cracks because there just wasn't, there was some cleaning up to do in the internal processes in terms of getting different committees to review, the Dutcher Review Committee, the Forensic Review Committee at certain times, also to take a look at it to see maybe there's some other resource this person needs to continue the progression. But there's no interference with that process. And there's no interference with, telling any of the clinical folks where the person should be going, shouldn't be going, any of that. We define the terms, and if you read through all the terms, they are very precise, and they focus on what it means clinically. Again, I'm using that term clinical to include the forensic component. And it's just to exclude the piece that you can't kind of hide under the carpet the fact that you lack resources to deal with it. That's why they're defined so precisely. I can't stress that enough. So it's really to reflect what the agency is doing and what it wants to do, and all the appropriate people with the appropriate levels of expertise far beyond mine were at the table, and we all agree that this is an appropriate resolution of this case. Thank you.
Your turn. Switch sides. There you go.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Wagner. I'm the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services Director of Forensic Services. I would like to just speak a little bit about our intentions for the funding. These individuals that are in the community not only receive intensive residential care, They also receive intensive clinical care at our local mental health authorities. So one of the pieces is to increase by 6 positions licensed clinical social workers in our local mental health authorities to supervise that treatment, the intensive treatment, and the conditional release of those individuals in the community. The remaining funding is to increase the number of beds we have available in our mental health intensive level of care. As Dr. Carvalho discussed, the majority of the equitees need this level of care when they are in the community. They are also vying for these resources with a lot of our civilly committed patients who are also in need of community resources. Our goal would be to increase it by 25 beds. This would likely be between 4 and 6 programs. It would depend on the responses to the request for proposals on the actual physical environment and how many individuals that could house. But what we are looking at is probably 4 to 6 residents per home for approximately between 4 and 6 homes for the 25 beds.
All set? All right. I have a couple questions that talk about numbers. I have people online who have their hands up, and I have people here that are going to want to ask questions. So I'm going to kick this off with just some facts. How many people are living in Whiting and separated by if you can, by the 2 buildings, Whiting and Dutcher? Does anybody have those, if you have those numbers?
There's a total of 229 beds within Whiting Forensic Hospital,
That incorporates both Whiting and Dutcher.
both Whiting and Dutcher.
And how many, if you know, how are all those beds filled?
No. Most of them are usually full. We have, because they also house individuals that are ordered there for competency restoration.
Yep.
That number can be pretty fluid. We can have anywhere between 2 and 8 open beds.
But it's not like you have 50 open beds there.
Correct.
So you might have 2 or 8, and the competency hearings are to determine whether someone is capable of standing trial or not, based on their psychiatric conditions.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Just want to make sure I'm getting it right. And the number of accutees that are there, do you have any idea on the number of accutees?
We have approximately 100 equities within Whiting Forensic Hospital.
So about 100 of them have started, are either in the beginning, or they're in some time frame of being recognized as an accutee, somebody who has been found not guilty by reason of mental defect, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay. The average length of stay, we did have a conversation the other day, so just so that people know, we did actually, so not asking just questions, but my understanding is that the average length of stay is between 5 and 15 years. Is that what you would say is the average length before someone gets to a point where they may be possibly eligible for community living?
This would be an approximation, but I think the estimate is probably closer to 15 years for the average.
Closer to 15 years.
The span usually is somewhere between 5 and 30 years, but I would say the average is 15.
Okay. And my last question, just on the numbers aspect of things for people. This agreement is not about letting people into the community. This agreement is about expanding the beds available for people to potentially, by the reasons, and they may not all be accutees that move into those beds, because you have a shortage of beds even for people who are committed but are not found not guilty by reason of mental defect.
Correct. It would be improving or increasing the number of beds for all of the patients with
All of the people that may be there. Some people are committed there without having committed a crime per se,
Correct.
but they might have a psychiatric condition which led to their commitment.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Representative Walker.
Thank you, and Senator Austin got a lot of my questions. So first of all, I'd like to zero in on, how long has this type of procedure been in place in Connecticut, the way you're handling these circumstances right now? Is this the first time? I got blank looks. Yeah, circumstances of discharge.
The circumstances of discharge has always been around since the hospital has been there. The lawsuit started in 2022,
Right.
but we've always had to pay much attention and focus to discharging patients from the hospital.
So you've had the patients that, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. You've had patients that have gone through this somewhat procedure and eventually been released back into the community before?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. And one of the other things, how many facilities do you have statewide right now currently that you are able to place any people in that fit under this category?
Are you referring to the mental health intensive
Yes.
residential
Yes.
programs in the community? There are
Mental-
38 of them.
There are 38 of them?
Yes.
And the 38 facilities,
There are 38 of them with 238 beds in total.
okay. So you have 238 beds that are available?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And currently you have, you're about 80% filled right now?
They are always filled.
They are always filled?
Those are filled inside the facility.
Okay. And when you talked about the number of staff ratio, you said 1 to 3. One staff person to 3 people, or 3 staff people to 1 person? I didn't understand that.
One staff person to 3 patients, or one staff person to 4 patients.
Okay, all right. And in this agreement, you're asking to add 6 positions more onto your staffing?
The 6 positions more are not for the residential intensive, for the mental health intensive. The 6 positions is for the local mental health authority to help facilitate a discharge out of the hospital, and as Jessica said, if you wanted to add anything, Jessica.
So those 6 positions are what we currently call TL, transitional leave supervisors, or conditional release supervisors.
Mhm.
So currently at the local mental health authority, those individuals, that transitional leave supervision or conditional release supervision is a very small part of their job.
Ah.
So this increase would allow us to provide a position at each of the state-operated local mental health authorities to provide solely the role of the transitional leave supervisor and conditional release supervisor, to be able to make sure that we're maintaining that level of supervision and coordination when the numbers of people in the community are increasing.
Okay. And the psychiatric review board is the stopgap for whether they go into the community process.
Correct. They would ultimately make the decision.
And that has been in placement for,
The mid-'89, 1989?
I believe it's 1989 or thereabouts.
1989, okay, all right. And so I think part of the questions that I've been looking at and listening to has been the staffing. Does DMHAS have enough staffing available for the potentially new facilities that you're going to be opening up? And should we be looking at adding in more staffing to make sure that we have the patient-to-staff ratio that makes people comfortable in knowing that they are in those facilities?
So just a point of clarity, for most of our residentials that are run, the mental health intensive, they are actually run by private, not-for-profit organizations in the community that
Okay.
are DMHAS funded.
Okay,
And so for that mental health intensive level of care, usually it is a 1 to 3 ratio with no less than 2 staff on each shift. So if we do look at supporting homes that are between 4 and 5 or 4 and 6 residents apiece, it would be at most 1 to 3 staffing if we had 2 staff on each shift. At more, it would be 1 to 2 if it was a 4-bedroom home. But we could certainly look at that if that was an issue that was concerning.
I mean, the obvious question would be, are we looking for security, or are we looking for the lowest cost? And that is what I think is very important that we look at. It's not about the cost, it's about the facility, it's about the security that we are providing to the communities and to the families that are interacting with the clients, that you have the equities. I'll get the language probably by tomorrow. And I think that's what makes a lot of people concerned, and I think we have to look at that. And I think when we got a briefing, we also talked about the need for staffing and to make sure. I understand we've been doing this for quite some time, but there's also the fact that we have had a lot of people that are in these positions or in these classifications that are now just really coming up to review. Am I correct on that?
Correct. I mean, we have supported people on conditional release, I think, over the last 30 years, but that number is likely going to be lower than what it will be once the settlement agreement.
Okay. And approximately how many people have gone through the system that you know of?
That would be a very rough estimate on my part. I can tell you right now we have 25 that are currently out on conditional release.
Okay.
25 equities.
Okay. All right. All right. I will come back. Thanks.
Senator Summers online.
Yes, good morning, and I appreciate your presentation. I just wanted it to be known that I fully support this bill or this agreement or the settlement agreement. I know that you guys have worked diligently and trustworthy along this process. I have a lot of experience with Whiting Forensic Hospital. It's been one of my priorities since I was elected 10 years ago. I've visited the facility multiple times. I've had intense conversations with both the clinicians there and some of the clients or patients that are there. And I think that, this lawsuit was brought about in the fact that there are people that wait decades, and I'm not exaggerating, decades to get just a few hours of conditional release or temporary release. And going through this process, which is arduous and, as I said, decades long, I could go through patient after patient that I've spoken to. When they make when they are stable and they have gone through the process and they have perhaps been moved from Whiting to Dutcher as a step-down unit, and they are compliant after years and years, when they are about to be allowed to have temporary release or transition to society through the PSRB, even with approval, sometimes they will sit in a hospital bed for years before there is a placement available. That's why there's this lawsuit, because someone who is deemed to be, I'm going to use the word, I'm not sure if it's the right word, fit to be released into the real world or society, still under the PSRB, constantly being monitored. They could sit in a hospital bed, taking up a hospital bed for years before they can find an appropriate placement for them. And sometimes we haven't funded that placement. So again, they sit there for years. Sometimes it's 2 years or 3 years. And these are people that have they either have been found NGRI or they have been civilly committed, and now they are restored, but they are stuck in the hospital facility. So I think it's really important that we recognize that this is not allowing someone who is not ready to just be released. It's process after process, and these folks are still under the PSRB. The other thing that I think is important to recognize is that the cost is high because the staff at the facilities in which these individuals can live with surveillance, with monitoring, are so highly trained that it costs, it's expensive. If they see a patient who starts to decompensate, that patient can then be sent right back to Whiting or to CVH Hospital. So there is the security that people are concerned about. That is part of this process. Security, safety, and also being of sound mind to be able to be out into the community. I also think that it's important, to recognize on the flip side, if we don't move forward with this, we will have people that are restored languishing in a hospital where they don't belong any longer. And I just wanted to make sure that that is something that is spoken about here. I also think and believe and have seen that DMHAS does an amazing job at trying to find facilities that are smaller in size. They're typically homes where the staff is highly trained. They're spread across the state of Connecticut, so you don't have a concentrated population in one area or the other. And I think that this settlement will allow us to have additional placements for individuals so they can move to the next step of their journey or their life, to a home where they, again, are, I don't want to use the word monitored, but they are monitored. They have to check in with their clinician. They have to make sure they're taking their medication, and they're greatly supervised, and they are still under the PSRB. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. And I fully support this. I know I have spoken to patients in the past that have languished in that hospital for 3 years because there's no placement for them. And if you think about it, if you are of sound mind and you have complied and you've spent decades getting to that point, your clinicians say that you are good to go. The PSRB has made the decision that you should be conditionally released, and yet you're not allowed to be released. You can see how patients at that point, after years of being put in an environment where you don't belong, could also decompensate and go back to where they were. So I think this is an important step for us to take for people that do have a disability, and I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Ackert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Greatly appreciate it. So the lawsuit you said started in 2022. Have we made any measurable gains in getting the individuals what this lawsuit is attempting to get to, their ability to get out and be in public and take respite? Have we had any gains since then?
Yes, we have. We have started, when the lawsuit started, we did start looking at our process and what we had put in place, as well as trying to make sure that Equities had the same access to the mental health intensive level of care beds that our civilly committed patients have. We doubled the TL applications in 2024 and more than doubled the TL and CR applications in 2025. So we have made progress in being able to move those forward that, again, are clinically determined to be ready to move forward.
Thank you. And so has it been a fiscal issue primarily that we haven't been able to get greater gains?
Yes, it's a fiscal and or resource, or a resource issue, which is internal fiscal issue.
And resources meaning?
The bed availability in the
Bed
community.
availability. So dollars get resources, right? Okay, so has a department been asking over these times for additional resources to get to this, grant, I know how the budgeting works and being on appropriate and learning from these good leaders here, that when a budget is presented by the administration, that's the budget. But has there been attempts to, get additional resources for the needs of this department outside of what may be presented on the governor's side?
I'll take this one. So we have attempted to, when we've had case growth, for example, we've attempted to add beds to the system, but we've not always had case growth. And so that's one of the areas that we're looking to strengthen as well.
Thank you, and thank you again for this information. It's been very helpful for me. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I was going to say, Representative Ackert, did you have a friendly amendment to add some money into the DMHAS budget?
Madam Chair, it seems like we're being sued to do that. Instead of
I agree.
possibly appropriately appropriating the dollars needed for these individuals. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I get it,
Thank you.
Representative Ackert. Representative Martinez.
Hello, I had a question regarding, I was hoping you could go into more the levels and the staffing. Once a patient does go into the temporary leave, like when they go into Martin House or Joe's Place or any of those private homes, I do know that there's different staffing levels and there's different levels of care. I believe you said you had 38 of those, is that correct? And I was just curious if you could expand on the levels of care.
So our highest level of residential resources is called the mental health intensive. That's the level of care we've been talking about today. Both Joe's Place and Martin House that you referred to are what we consider supervised apartments. So although it's misleading, that makes it sound like it's always in an apartment building, sometimes they are in homes. But it is a slightly lower level of care as far as the staffing ratio and the funding resources. The other levels of care we have is the MRO, the Medicaid Rehab Option homes, which are primarily funded by CMS, but that DMHAS also funds a part of that, and then it just goes out.
Excuse me, if I could just interrupt for one quick second, because Martin House is a familiar name that goes all over the state in different areas. So I want everybody to understand that you may not be talking about the Martin House that is in such and such a place, or the Joe's Place that's in such and such a place. So I just want to make sure that the regular people who are listening to this don't think that their Martin House is housing these very high-risk folks. So I just, when we're talking about this, sometimes Martin House refers to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is not what you are talking about here. So I just want to make sure that when we're naming these, that we understand that we are not necessarily talking about the one that you may know of out in XYZ community, someplace in Connecticut. So,
apologies.
thank you. Please continue, Representative.
Sorry, were you all
So those are the three main levels of residential care that we have in the community.
in the staffing differences? Or but they're all, those are supervised? I do know that there's a team, I know that as a behavioral health nurse, home care goes in. Has anything been considered about ensuring that the resources are there as people are going through the system and they're getting to those supervised apartments when they go to more of a team approach?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
Sure. So patients are going through the system, and I see where you're adding beds, but I know that in those supervised apartments, patients tend to live there for very long periods of time. So I was wondering, you were saying that you have double the patients now up top, and you're getting people through the system. What are you doing for staffing or to ensure that there's those community resources as they get through to, say, supervised apartments?
So, as in the lower levels of care. So we have seen for the most part that our current level of resources has been able to manage the continuum through the continuity of care, and that where our significant logjam is occurring is with the mental health intensives, which is why we intend to focus this funding on improving the number of mental health intensive levels of care. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but.
Okay, so you don't see an increase coming through the rest of the continuum with patients doubled at that level?
I mean, we've seen a small increase, but it's not as significant as what we've been experiencing at the mental health intensive level of care. So that's where we were focusing.
Okay, thank you. I'd assumed, because I believe you said it's gonna add on, what is it? This is looking to add on 25 beds. So I thought there would be increases at other levels as well. Thank you.
So we did look at the idea of increasing the number of supervised apartments to see if we could move some of the individuals from the mental health intensive level of care to the supervised apartment and get them through that continuum of care. But when we did a closer look at this cohort in the plaintiff class, really where we are needing the most resources in this mental health intensive. We could always use, increased beds at all the levels of care, but this is the level of care we're seeing the most intense need for.
Thank you.
Representative Belton. And I have everybody who's had their hand up. I have you on my list. I can't call you all at once, though. Representative Belton.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, there are currently 100 equitees around?
There are around 100 in the hospital, and then there's around 25 that are
25
inpatient living.
Okay, how many equities are currently waiting to be discharged?
So there are around 50 that meet this current class. That does not mean that so the current class they've reached full level 4 privileges. That does not mean that we've made the determination that they're all clinically ready to be discharged. So I don't know exactly what the number would be right now that are clinically ready for discharge. We are supporting currently 16 individuals in the transitional leave, phase 2 transitional leave process right now on overnights.
All set, Representative. Up next is Senator Marks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, thank you for being here. So we have 38 homes right now. Are those all with the equities who were put into Whiting because of not guilty for reason of insanity? Or is it also some of the, are they all equity? I'm a nurse, I'm not a lawyer. Are there also some clients who were in Whiting because of their psychiatric diagnosis?
These are patients from all across the other state hospitals who may not have anything to do with the Psychiatric Security Review Board or equities. So it's a mixture of patients from all the state hospitals, including the forensic hospital.
Okay, so now when we're talking about increasing the capacity of those, the 4 to 6 homes, are we just talking about those that are in Whiting because they are there because of not guilty by reason of the I was insanity, but Senator Austin has been saying something else, so I don't know what the politically correct word is.
Correct. So the 4 to 6 homes that we're thinking of adding would be to hold these equities or patients from under the Psychiatric Security Review Board.
So those that were NGRIs.
Correct.
Okay. And then the good senator from the 18th said that the staff is highly trained. And we sit and we hear about our residents with that are in group homes, the waiting list that they have, how awful the staffing is, how the turnover is terrible. And I don't think we have a lot of public hearings where, unfortunately, our constituents who are in these kind of homes probably don't have the same advocacy behind them, so we don't hear a lot about what is really happening in these homes. So my question to you is, I'm guessing these are not state employees who are getting a pension and amazing health insurance and I don't know how many paid holidays, that this is going to be sourced out to a not-for-profit, which are struggling. What is this staff is highly trained? What is the highly trained that this staff will have? And how hard is it right now to keep the staff in the 38 homes that we have?
So it is true that most of our mental health intensives, we have one mental health intensive that is operated by state employees, but other than that, they are private not-for-profit agencies that are DMHAS funded to provide this level of care. Usually, the mental health intensive level of care, these 38 homes, the agencies that run them find that they have a better retention rate than some of the other larger group homes, I think primarily because it is smaller. and there's a little bit more of a community. We have found that staffing some of the homes in more rural areas is a challenge for some of the agencies, but for the most part, I don't think they have struggled with the staffing in the same ways as some other levels of care have struggled.
Okay, and what is the training?
So we leave that to the agency. The agencies submit a proposal. The hiring piece, I mean, they all go through agency-wide training. In addition, if they are to house somebody that's under the Psychiatric Security Review Board, they all have to attend a mandatory PSRB training, the Psychiatric Security Review Board. So they have to be trained in what the different conditions and modifications are in order to be able to support somebody under the PSRB.
And is that a 40-hour course, an 80-hour course, a 8-hour course, a 2-hour course?
I believe the PSRB training is a full day, is an 8-hour course.
Okay, because, you know, I mean, they're sociopaths and they're psychopaths. Sociopaths, no medication is going to treat them. It's just intensive therapy. How about de-escalation? Do we have a problem with de-escalating? How much training do they get for that?
So they do also have trainings in de-escalation. I would also add that all of the equities that are supported in these residential levels of care are also connected to the local mental health authority for clinical care. So they would have access to the mobile response teams that are attached to each of the local mental health authorities that would be able to go out and respond to any crises. These are also individuals where if they are under the Psychiatric Security Review Board and there is a decompensation in their psychiatric presentation, most of them do then return back to Whiting Forensic Hospital for stabilization. We do not attempt to support their stabilization in the community.
Okay, and just one more question, if I may, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
And so if there has to be 3 staff members in a house, even right now, let's say, if there has to be 3 staff members in the house for the evening shift and 2 of them have just called out with the flu, do they go short-staffed, or is there a pool of per diems or other people that they can find, or is it mandatory overtime? What do we do? Because that happens all the time. And so I'm sitting here, and I am a visiting nurse, and so with much respect to Joyce Grayson, it weighs heavy on my mind. So I am asking you, what happens when we can't staff these homes?
So most of the agencies that support the mental health intensive level of care have multiple homes, have multiple programs, and so they do have a larger staffing pool to be able to pull from for overtime. What we do ask is that they not go below 2. It's not below 3, but not below 2 per shift. And we have never been made aware of any times that
In the mental health intensive, it's gone, but they struggle to go to get to.
Have you ever asked if they've gone below 2?
I'm sorry.
Have you ever asked if they've gone below 2?
My mic's not on.
I don't think we've asked, I have not specifically asked that question. We do have quarterly meetings with them where we do go over staffing.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Lester, followed by Representative Corpus online.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just a few questions, because I heard a couple of different things. So in her commentary earlier, Senator Summers mentioned that the practice of DMHAS in citing these facilities is to ensure that there isn't a concentration in any one area. I just heard in response to questions from Senator Marks a statement that staffing more rural areas is a challenge, which maybe infers that they're more likely to be in urban areas. I'm not sure if that's correct inference or not. Just wanted to understand better what the RFP process looks like and how that citing determination is made.
So the request for proposal would go out, would be submitted, and it would be statewide, and we would be seeking proposals back to be able to provide this mental health intensive level of care. We do have mental health intensives that are in the more rural area. What I was indicating is that those tend to be the homes where the agencies reflect that they have a harder time with retention. They still are able to staff those homes.
And so when you say it's statewide, does that mean that there needs to be statewide coverage? Or what sort of question, obviously one question is the safety burden on community is significant for this challenging population. So what sort of procedures are in place in the RFP to sort of understand where the siting could happen? Could an agency come in and say, we're going to build them all in one particular community or not? Is that something that could happen, or is that something that the RFP process currently contemplates?
So the request for proposal has not been submitted at this time. Normally what would happen is we would put out the request for proposal and we would look at all of the proposals that are submitted and look at them for appropriateness, but also to try to make sure that we do have resources throughout the state. I don't know if that answers.
Let me just add to that. It is not in our interest to have all the mental health intensive programs concentrated in any one area. We have patients from all over the state, and so it's really important when we factor where patients go based on clinical issues, based on where they came from. It would be very important for us to make sure that these mental health intensives are all over the state. Right now we have 38. They're all over the state. Again, they're not concentrated in one area, and that would be what we would be looking for in our request for proposal.
Okay, so normally this is the Appropriations Committee. So normally we just vote on dollars, and that's the thing that we do. But in this particular case, we've already voted on a budget that increases funding for DMHAS community placements, I think, as the settlement contemplates. So the funding is already there in our proposed state budget. In ratifying the proposed settlement before us today, though, we're going beyond our normal role of just approving dollars. And as I understand it, there are a number of changes to policies and procedures in facilitating the community release of these individuals that we would be ratifying. And can you just speak a little bit more to the policies and procedures changes that we would be signing off on with this agreement?
So just first, I'd just like to speak to, as I mentioned earlier, this agreement does not change any of the statutory or regulatory requirements with regard to the PSRB. It continues as it has essentially for the last 30 years. So the changes that have been made, process and procedure-wise, are related to the hospital's review. It doesn't eliminate any of those processes. It just is a more efficient process. So I'll turn it over to either one of you to speak more in depth about that.
So some of the areas that we need to tighten up on, so to speak, is around administrative process. So for example, if the hospital, through their risk committee, make a decision that a patient is ready to be transitioned into community on a transitional leave, they will then have to go to the Psychiatric Security Review Board. One of the provisions in this settlement agreement is that once we make a clinical decision, we have 90 days in which to bring it to the Psychiatric Security Review Board. And so those are some of the structural changes that will have to be made. And other changes around how frequent we review these cases. So, for example, in the settlement agreement right now, we would have to, our DRC or Dutcher Review Committee would have to review each case once they're on a full level 4 privilege or status, would have to review them every 90 days. So those are some of the changes.
Okay. This is obviously a very challenging population to place, and the agreement contemplates this RFP process. I know in recent years, due to litigation and settlements and jury verdicts, there have been a lot of concerns by private providers about taking high-risk patients. And sort of in advance of the RFP, I'm curious if there have been conversations between the state and nonprofits that are likely to participate in the RFP process to sort of gauge their willingness to, to take this population. Is that something, those conversations have happened or not? And if so, what's been the feedback that's been received?
As far as I know, we have not yet, we have not submitted the RFP, and we have not yet had those discussions with anyone. We need to know that the money is there and the resources is there before we do that.
If I may just briefly add, that's why there's that grace period built into it, because we anticipated time we need to ramp up to deal with these issues.
I would also just add briefly that we do have a number of agencies already that support this mental health intensive level of care, that do support PSRB individuals in the community, so that we anticipate that there will be at least some submissions for proposals, but we have not had any initial conversations with any private providers.
And I appreciate the committee's time. Just a question, just following up on Representative Belton's question. So she was asking about the cadence of the likely, or the size of the likely population that would be at issue here. And I know that there are 50 level 4 equities currently in Whiting, but I heard 16 of them are currently in I forget what it's called, the community, or
There's 16 of them that are on overnights on transitional leave.
Okay, so the initial cadence, I assume, would be that those 16 would be the most likely to be placed in the community under this program, or is that the first cadence? Like, what's the likely, are we talking about likely 50 people released in the first year? Are we talking about 16? Are we talking about a smaller subset? Just sort of walk us through the likely cadence of this.
So the 16 individuals that are doing overnights already have a targeted bed for them that they are utilizing on those overnights. So if we look at that 50-ish minus the 16, we're then looking at about 35. We have about 10 to 15 of those individuals that are not currently ready, clinically ready for engagement with the community. That could change over the next year. So we're really looking at 20 to 25 individuals who are clinically ready, who will need placement somewhere within the state over the next year, is what we're anticipating, which is part of why we came up with a number of trying to look for 25 beds throughout the state.
So I said that was my last question, but I was wrong. There one more question. So if there earlier in sort of laying out the process here, there was sort of an abbreviated version, but if someone goes into community placement and they're no longer compliant with their treatment plan, they have to go back to Whiting. Is that the consequence? And is there a time limit on that? Is there a point where they would no longer be subject to that requirement to comply with the treatment plan?
The courts, at the time of the NGRI finding, the courts will order a commitment period. Our average length of commitment is 30 years. It can vary, but that's usually about 30 years. Usually judges will give the maximum sentence for the charges. So at any point during that commitment period, if somebody is not complying with their memorandum of decision, which is there's a long list of things that they have to follow from the Psychiatric Security Review Board. The community reports to the PSRB 6-month reports on how somebody is doing. However, if there's any violations in the MOD, those have to be reported immediately to the board, and they can revoke their conditional release status and bring them back into the hospital at any point in time.
Thank you very much.
Representative Corpus online.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I think I heard that the average amount of time someone goes from being deemed an equity to being released to the community program is about 5 to 15 years. Is that correct?
So I am estimating that the average has been about 15 years. I think the length of time we're looking at is anywhere between 5 and 30 when we look at the people who have received conditional release status over the last few years.
Thank you. And with the changes that are contemplated in this settlement agreement, what do you expect? Do you expect that time to shrink appreciably?
I think it may decrease by a few years, because there are individuals who are deemed clinically ready who may not have the resources in the community in a timely fashion. I don't think that it will decrease appreciably. There's still a lot of clinical assessment that goes on both in the Whiting Forensic Hospital and the Dutcher Enhanced Security Board.
Okay, so the changes that are being agreed upon as a result of this settlement agreement aren't, they're not that radical. I know they're not clinical changes, and they're just really changes about how quickly the various agencies have to communicate with each other. But what my final question is, sometimes when a settlement agreement is reached, it's not an A plus for either party because it's the result of a compromise. Do you all feel like that we've gotten it right? Like the settlement agreement really does reflect best practices of how to get people through this program in the most beneficial way? Or has this caused your agency to think, okay, this is a starting point, but we still have a few things we need to change? Do you think now we've gotten best practices as reflected in this particular agreement?
I think so. I think we have worked really hard, even at the time in 2022 when this lawsuit started, to review the processes that we have at DMHAS to see if we can shorten some of the administrative stays. And so what was happening was that we didn't have a large consistency. It wasn't consistent over board. Some teams would get patients to the Psychiatric Security Review Board for approval in X amount of time, and then you have teams who would do it for much longer. And so what this process actually does for us, in a way, is to put in some consistency into our system. And so that, in terms of best practices, I think that is better. And so that is what I want to answer for that part. We still have that issue, though, of patients moving into the community if there are resources. So right now, we don't have resources. Right now, we would have patients who could move into the community, but because there are no beds available, then they don't move. And so with this funding that we're asking for, we would be able to improve that part of the process.
Thank you.
All set, Representative? Senator Anwar?
Thank you.
And I just have to tell everybody again, we have you on the list. You keep thinking that you are the next one. You are not. There are other people in front of you. So please be patient. Thank you. Senator Anwar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to run a few things by you. One of I understand the provision is that there will be increase in staffing. Would you be able to speak about that?
Increase in staffing.
The increase in the 6 positions, is that
Correct.
what you're referring to? So currently there are staff at each of the local mental health authorities that are charged with supervising the conditional release. So those 6 positions would be able to increase the number of individuals providing those supports in the community.
Thank you. And I know to the Public Health Committee, there was a report that was sent in 2023 about Whiting, and then also the challenges of recruitment. And then there were healthcare workforce shortage across the state. But the question was, we were having a little bit more than the rest of the state was having problems with. Are we in the position to address some of those limitations that we have historically faced?
In recent times, the staffing at Whiting has improved. From the medical staff perspective, we have recently recruited a number of doctors to work at Whiting. We still have some vacancies that we are addressing right now, but overall, there's been an improvement. I'm also aware that in recent times, the CEO of Whiting has recruited quite a large number of staff to work on the units, forensic treatment specialists and so forth. And so the staffing there is much better today.
Another aspect, and I'm going to, for a second, while we are in Appropriations Committee, I'm going to wear the hat of Public Health co-chair. We have had some of these conversations, and we have tried to learn about what the needs are of some of our facilities. And at times we have been informed that things are working smoothly and there's challenging world and we do not need more resources. I just want us to see if there's a way for us to reflect that we should not have to make policies based on lawsuits for things that have been identified, which have been suggested by legislators to say we can do better on these angles. These are better things that can be done. How can we improve this further? So the fact that we have to have a lawsuit and subsequently come to this point is suggestion that there were missed opportunities, and perhaps not today, but at some point we should have very frank conversation about what were those missed opportunities, because this is probably in the last many years, third time or so where we are having lawsuits resulting in policy related issues within whiting and DMHAS related work. So I just wanted to mention that because this is quite concerning.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Madam
set,
Chair.
Senator.
Yes.
Up next is Representative Johnson, but I want to also go over a few more numbers because people have been talking about a lot of different things. But before we go any further, I just want to say that we have a total of 3,416 positions that are funded for DMHAS, which means they do a plethora of different jobs for you all, but 3,416. We have also for community services, and these are just numbers, and each and every one of you have access to this, but under the managed service system, we have $84 million there. For the TBI community services, we have $9 million. For home and community-based services, we have $27 million. For grants for mental health services, we have $77 million. This is an agency that receives a lot of funding because we recognize that you have a lot going on. So it's not just mental health, it's also addiction services. So we have substance use disorders. And you don't see everybody that has a mental health issue. So the Department of Corrections have people that are incarcerated that have mental health issues that are not necessarily funded by you. Certainly not while they're in the Department of Corrections, but maybe if they get out on the streets for respective services, may or may not be, depending on where they are in their help. So I wanted to sort of give everybody an umbrella look at the budgets that we talk about. And often people say, perhaps we need more services. Personally, I've been fighting for more services for mental health for a lot of years since I worked in the Department of Correction. I think that we have a lot of work to do, but what your agency does deal with right now receives $807 million. So it's not chump change. It's a lot of money to deal with the plethora of things you have to do. So Representative Johnson, and then there are people that are asking to speak for the second time. So
thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for your presentations today. I realize how difficult this is. So I have a few questions based on some of the remarks that you made today. First of all, I wanted to know what standard do you use to say someone is a Category 4 and can go into the community? What standards are you using? How do you deal with that? Based on the type of diagnosis, because we presume many are probably diagnosed as psychotic and or having psychotic periods. And then how do you understand where their triggers are, especially after they've been treated, they're in a stable environment, then they go into the community with a different type of environment, and perhaps there is a trigger there that is something that should be known to all who are involved. How do you do that?
Thank you very much for your question. So the clinical teams at Whiting Forensic Hospital, including Whiting Division and Dutcher Division, They're a multidisciplinary team. So they have a psychiatrist on staff on their team, and that psychiatrist is primarily responsible for doing a diagnostic evaluation or several diagnostic evaluations and evaluations periodically on these patients. You have a psychologist on the team. The psychologist would be able to do psychological testing to understand better the psyche of each patient and to contribute to the diagnostic richness of what the team would decide. And you also have other members of the team. So you have nursing, you have a forensic treatment specialist, all these various disciplines, social workers, for example. You have therapists who are going to be doing intensive psychotherapy with these patients. So we're getting like from every single angle, what are some of the diagnostic elements, and then you have team meetings where you put all this together to sort of have a deep understanding and formulation of each patient.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up on that, in terms of the brain structure, it's different for psychotics than it is for, say, people who just have other types of behavioral health difficulties. And I just wondered, in terms of many of the people who are dealing in these circumstances, that is part of the difficulty that one would have in terms of how the brain works. And I just, I have concerns because I was in Middletown when Jessica Short was murdered by somebody who got free from the Whiting Forensic Institute after they were categorized as a level 4. And I also represent Wyndham, and although this is not someone who was an acquittee, this is somebody who was deemed to be okay in the community by many psychologists and psychiatrists with special overview, and he murdered Nurse Grayson. So I have real concerns about how we're dealing with these different types of analysis, because I don't know as though we fully get what are the triggers and how are we going to deal with them. And so the other thing that I'm curious about is the supervised apartments. Where are they located? Are they located in apartment buildings with other people?
So I can answer the second part of that question first. The supervised apartment level of care, it varies. Most of them are in multifamily homes where they are the only individuals within that like only program clients are within that home. But we do have some supervised apartment programs that are scattered throughout an apartment building with people who are regularly renting apartments.
And following up on the question about when there may be a problem, you call in the community resources. What is the mental health community resource, and how does that work in the 38 towns?
The local mental
health authority. My bad. Thank you.
So DMHAS has local mental health authorities throughout the state. They are both, there are some that are state operated, and there are some that are DMHAS funded, private not-for-profit local mental health authorities. They provide clinical services, including psychiatric therapy, group therapy, rehab, nursing, and they also have the mobile response team. All the local mental health authorities have a local mobile response team that can respond in the community to a crisis.
So are they, what towns are they in, do you know? Do you have a list?
All of them? Well, they are on the DMHAS website.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we can get that information
thank you.
relative
Thank you,
to
Madam
something.
Chair. And then the other question that I have has to do with the contracts. The contracts that you have with the private nonprofits, do you have access to all of the things that go on? Because a lot of the private nonprofits are private entities, and a lot of the, when you look at healthcare, private nonprofits like the Advantage plans, for example, they don't give you the data anymore. Once you have a private nonprofit receiving the money from the state, the private nonprofits don't provide, in some circumstances, and I'm asking you, do you get data from them in these circumstances?
We do get data from the private not-for-profits. We also are involved in monitoring those contracts. The different levels of care are monitored by different divisions within Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, but we do utilize regular utilization management meetings. We also do regular site visits at most of the agencies.
And so why do we have private nonprofits versus the public? Because you have one public and then you have some private nonprofit. Why don't we just have all public?
I think that's a decision that the legislature made, Representative Johnson, not the agencies. We made the decision to go to private nonprofits as a cost-saving measure a long time ago. That's why we closed our state hospitals, although that was done at the request of the federal government. That's why we closed our training centers that were for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's why we struggle today with funding our private nonprofits, and we've done a lot of good work relative to adding more funding onto it. It was not a decision that they made, it was a decision we made.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for that. And I agree with that's what we did, but I didn't know if there was an option through Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to focus in these circumstances, maybe not for the group homes and for the other things that we do that are a nonprofit, but in circumstances where we have people that have these very difficult behavioral health issues, that it might be better to create public institutions. And that I'll stop at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, I appreciate that, but it's not just behavioral health. I think that we are trying to conflate a lot of different issues, and there are people that are on for the second time, and we still have some people for the first time, so just so everybody knows that. Behavioral health, different than someone who has issues relative to criminal insanity, different than people who have mental health diagnoses, different than people who have developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. There's a lot of different types of people here, and I want to make sure that we're not conflating everything into a central diagnosis of somebody. So I just want to sort of let step back, and that's why I didn't want to start naming different institutions, because they all have different people within the confines of them, and I'm concerned that we are trying to fit everybody into a square peg when, a square hole when they're a round peg or anything along those lines. I just want to say that. So Representative Cavros DeGraw for the first time.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I want to align some of my comments with what Senator Summers had shared, because I've been on the Public Health Committee for 6 years, and we have frankly heard testimony that is incredibly sad and hard to listen to when the folks in Whiting Forensic have been able to testify, and it's very hard to hear. One of the questions I have as we're listening to all of this debate is when. And I understand the lawsuit was focused on trying to get people out faster when they have met the conditions they need to meet. When the folks previously who have been placed in these situations, in whether it be apartments, group homes, whatever it is there a percentage that we have of who actually reoffends and who could end up back in white? Is there some sort of long-term history that we can point to of the success of having people after decades of being incarcerated and Whiting to being out in the world?
The number we got back from the Psychiatric Security Review Board over time is fairly low. In fact, in my time at DMHAS, I'm only aware of one case that has come back.
Okay, so in all, and do you have any sense of how long that goes back, or I just want to try to get a time frame on that one lone person.
So, Jessica, can you just elaborate?
The recidivism rate is very low as far as arrests. Again, I do think we've had a few more that have come back for stabilization to Whiting. They haven't necessarily had their conditional release revoked, but they have been brought back to Whiting for stabilization. But the number compared to the people that we've supported in the community is extremely low. As we've kind of talked through this process, because of the historical risk, there's a lot of assessment and risk mitigation that's taken into consideration on every stage, including when they're in the community. And so if there are any signs of decompensation, we usually will bring them back in for that period of stabilization.
And then once stabilized, then there have been successful returns again.
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Up next is Representative Martinez.
Hi, so I heard it discussed a couple of times talking about the length of stay, the average of 15 years in the Whiting buildings. In the 38 homes, when people get to that level, what is the average stay in that setting?
So they vary. What we've seen is that, I mean, it varies by home. So usually we do the average length of stay for each of the programs. They've been anywhere between 7 and 12 years. A point of reference, though, would be that the mental health intensive level of care itself was not created until the DOJ was involved, Department of Justice was involved with Connecticut Valley Hospital. So most of those homes have only been open for about 15 years. But the average length of stay for each program is anywhere between 7 years and 12 years.
Okay, and just to clarify, because I have two different things, one that I heard, one that I wrote down. Is it, there's 100 equities right now?
Approximately.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think there's approximately 100 equities within the hospital.
Okay, so my concern, I think, was just, does 25 really meet the need for the beds, or does it meet the minimum, especially when you were saying that these cases are trending upwards, and I'd asked earlier about the apartments and there not being a big need there. So it's, it's kind of a lengthy bottleneck, both at the Whiting buildings and afterwards, which, I just want to make sure that patients are getting the level of care that's appropriate and what is needed.
We will continue to assess as we move forward. What we believed at this time when we looked at the numbers and who we are looking to support moving out, that the addition of the 25 beds at this level of care would be adequate for the foreseeable future. It's hard to look too far into the future, but when we look at the number of people who have progressed to being ready for community engagement over the last couple of years, we believe that this is a fairly accurate assessment.
Thank you.
All set, Representative?
Just to
Oh,
follow
sorry.
up on that point, again, we're talking about the settlement agreement, and the settlement agreement provides the flexibility so the agency can do that. There is no requirement in there that they increase 10 beds, 15 beds, or whatever. And we're not under a court order with respect to it either, so that's why the settlement agreement makes sense. It gives them the opportunity to move real time and adjust. Thank you.
All set, Representative? Senator Marks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're just talking about those that are at Whiting or Dutcher because of their NGRI, not guilty by reason of mental deficit. So they're not felons because they were found not to be criminals. And so we're just talking about 20, maybe 25 of these equities being released into the community, right?
So, to answer your question, that's a point in time thing. We are only speaking about equities. Equities, once who are not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, they've been found, they originally engaged in criminal conduct, but they have not been found guilty. So they're sent for treatment. They're not like prisoners. Those folks, once they reach full level 4, are within this class. So obviously it's going to continue throughout the 7 years. The class will change. Not the class, but the people in the class, excuse me, will change. So right now, there is a group of about 25 that they've taken a look at. But as you've heard before, it's not always linear. Sometimes some proceed linearly and continue to progress. Some of them takes a little longer. Some of them have decompensate and go back. So that's based on their current estimate right now. It's not that we're only talking about 25 people here on out.
Okay, but it's just those that with the NGRI equities. I guess those are the only ones that are equities. And I did get so we didn't have a public hearing on this because it's a lawsuit. And I did hear from a constituent today, and I did have my aide forward her email to the entire appropriations team, and it was difficult. It was a difficult email. And she talked about her niece who was murdered by her partner, stabbed 43 times, and then he kept her in the house in bed. He was in bed with her for 2 days. until somebody came and found her. And so when we talk about most of the equities, they're not in Whiting and Dutcher because they got a couple DUIs or they shoplifted. I mean, they're there because of heinous crimes. Am I correct?
As I said earlier, these are patients who are high risk and they have committed offenses while their mental status had deteriorated.
Okay, then, so I understand you're doing this because we weren't able to do our job. So like Senator Anwar and others have said, Rec Ackert, I believe, said it, it's too bad that we're doing it this way and not another way, but that's what's happening. But if these are really high-risk equities who have done heinous crimes, and if they're high risk, they need high care. And then we are told that they're just getting a little bit of probably watching a video on the computer, because that's how we all learn these days. I'm just fearful that we're just making the same mistake we make so many times, right? We've gone down this path before, and that we're putting people out into the community, and many of them probably deserve that, but I really highly doubt that they're getting the high quality training, people that have trained to deal with a psychotic person. If somebody then starts to have a psychotic episode, I've done it before. It is hard, really, really hard. And when you do call the mental health authority, it can take 2 hours for them to come. That is why most people call 911 and have the police come, because it is really hard. So I just sit here, I don't know. If it wasn't a lawsuit, I doubt we would even have a say in this, would we? Maybe judiciary would, I don't know. But that within 2 hours, I have to decide on such, it's risky. And maybe you don't think it's risky, but I do. So that these are heinous crimes that the people have committed. And I think we just need to keep that in our minds. And if they move into the house next to me, they're covered under the ADA. I don't need to know that they're moving into the house next to me, do I?
So that is public information where they go. And so anyone in the community would be able to access that information.
How do you access?
Where they live. So I believe this is through the Psychiatric Security Review Board. Jessica?
The memorandums of decision usually have where an individual is residing, so that information could likely be requested through the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay, and just one more question, Madam Chairs. And then how about the family members, those affected by it's not a crime, those affected by the event that this equity did? Are they told that this equity is going out into the community?
The identified victims by the court are notified of each PSRB hearing and are allowed an opportunity to speak at each of the PSRB hearings.
I didn't hear the end.
I'm sorry, they're given an opportunity to speak at each of the PSRB hearings, the Psychiatric Security Review Board hearings. So they're notified of the hearings, of any TL applications, of any transitional leave applications or conditional release applications.
Okay, that didn't change in 2023? I had a victim that said it was. I mean, somebody.
No, it hasn't changed.
Okay, thank
No.
you. I appreciate your
PSRB
answers.
still notifies victims of a hearing.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you.
Senator Summers for the second time.
Yes, thank you. I know a bunch of us have spoken for the second time. I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding we're talking about folks that are both civilly committed and NGRI. So not every person that goes through the PSRB and for temporary release and then permanent release has committed a quote heinous crime, because I've actually talked to many of them and worked with many of them that have sat ready to go for 2 years before a space is available, and they did not commit heinous crimes. So there's all level of crimes, and it takes a very long time to get to a point. Sometimes, as I've said, decades, it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years, to be able to be in a condition that the PSRB, who looks mostly at risk, we changed that just a few years ago because all they looked at before was risk, before they will approve or do approve that somebody is able to be temporarily released and then conditionally released into a facility. I wanted to ask 2 questions. First of all, I think that we are today approving the settlement agreement. We're not necessarily voting on the policy that has gotten us to this settlement agreement. If we do not approve the settlement agreement today, can you speak to what will happen?
Yes. We have a fully executed settlement agreement. One of the provisions in it provides that it's subject to approval by the legislature as well as the court, which would resolve the federal lawsuit that's pending. It's the class action lawsuit. If the legislature doesn't approve it, or votes it down, doesn't, rejects it completely, and we never obtain approval, then that settlement agreement is of no effect, and we would continue with the litigation. And, we would defend it. There would continue to be discovery, information shared. Senator Summers already spoke about a piece that some of the folks at Whiting are what are called involuntary. There's not just the NGRI folks, and they're all competing for similar resources. The NGRI folks require some additional support and resources than the other ones, but as a general proposition, it's not that it's just divided up. So while this is going on, they'll be getting information about that as well, and the agency is going to continue to try to do business, but we would have that lawsuit, and at the end of it, there'll be procedurally, there would be probably some motions for summary judgment. At the end of it, if the court decides that Connecticut's not doing what it's supposed to, it could put us under a consent order with a court monitor that requires certain reports to address your safety concerns. The court might just say, look, you need to get these people out once their treatment team says you're ready. The court might say they have to be out in 90 days. So we don't have that flexibility to engage in what the clinicians have determined to be an appropriate length of process to see it to fruition, to make sure we get those adequate resources. Because there is a process in place that we heard a little bit about, that the community service providers are coming in, they're working with the individuals, see if they're a good fit. There's a lot of that stuff that you learn on a day-to-day basis when you're boots on the ground that isn't necessarily reflected in the agreement per se. But all of that could be out the window if it's not approved. We'll litigate it the best we can, but we don't know what the court would do and what the court would potentially impose. So that's what happens if it's not approved.
I appreciate that. I also wanted to ask just really quickly, when somebody is either conditionally, temporarily released or conditionally released, I'm not sure if I'm using the right language, into the community, can you confirm that they are still being followed by a clinician? This is not as if it's easy to get out. We're just letting everybody out, those that have committed the most heinous crimes. That is not the case, but just please confirm that. And that they are going to a facility where the people are trained. They have gotten de-escalation training. They understand what the symptoms are to be looking at somebody who's decompensating. I actually know this because I've actually talked to somebody who was civilly committed, then decompensated and went back to whiting. They are watched, they are monitored, they are in contact with the clinical staff, and they are still under the PSRB. I think everybody needs to have that additional level of comfort. And if you could speak to that, I think it would be helpful.
So I would say that yes, each of the equities prior to their release, so before we even apply for transitional leave, we have a period of engagement where the community provider will come into the facility to get to know the client and familiarize themselves with the client's clinical needs, and also to have in-depth conversations with the hospital clinical team to understand the individual better psychiatrically. Once in the community, that individual is assigned to a treatment team at one of the local mental health authorities. So they would have an assigned psychiatrist. Usually the MOD will indicate they have to meet with that psychiatrist on no less than a monthly basis. Usually in the beginning, they meet with them more often than that. They're also assigned to a clinician, which would be either a licensed professional counselor or a licensed clinical social worker. And then in addition to that, they also have an individual who is identified as their transitional leave supervisor or conditional release supervisor, depending on what they're out on, who make sure that the individual is abiding by the memorandum of decision, as well as looking at the risk and mitigating any risk issues. So in addition to all of those clinical pieces, these individuals usually then need the residential component. And that's the piece that we were talking about. As far as the training and professionalism at the residentials, most of those have a manager on site who is a clinician. Similar to our hospitals, the people who are doing the direct care staff do not tend to be clinicians. Some of them could be. They usually go through an in-depth training process within their own internal agency before they're hired full-time.
All set,
I
Senator?
appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. I see no other questions, so we're going to end this briefing. If you want to talk to DMHAS staff or the Attorney General offline, they are right over there, and you can talk with them. We are going to go into caucus, and Madam Administrator, is it 2B for the Dems and 2D for the Rs? What are they?
2A for the Rs.
Okay, so 2B, 2 Bravo for the Dems, and 2 Alpha for the Rs. So this briefing is ending. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're in what, 2B?
2B, 2B, and we can go in there. Yes, Madam Administrator.
The woman today was shooting.
you.